Hey everybody, welcome to AP Biology. I'm Mr. Menike, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the immune system together. The first system that we need to talk about when we look at the AP exam and the body systems that are covered there. You have a packet that has a page that looks kind of like what you see on your screen right now. Your packet of the human body systems starts with an image of the difference between protostomes and deuterostomes. And we talked a little bit about protostomes and deuterostomes in our classification unit. We, humans, are deuterostomes. And when we talk about deuterostomes, we are chordates, which means we have a dorsal nerve cord along with, as embryos, what are called gill slits, openings in the sides of our, they're not really openings, they're more like folds in the sides of our bodies that become our jaw and shoulder and bones in our vertebrae, in our neck, the hyoid bone. And a deuterostome is any animal where the blastopore forms the anus first, and only the echinoderms, or the starfish, and their relatives are in the same category as the vertebrates when it comes to that. Everything else is considered a protostome, and a protostome is when the little pore in the embryo forms the mouth first. When we talk about the human body, we can split the human body up into sections using different kinds of planes or cuts through the segments of the body. And so this is a little map for you to take a look at if you would like to review that from anatomy, or define that if you haven't seen these terms before. The frontal, sagittal, and transverse or cross-section planes help us to view the internal anatomy, and also, especially when it comes to the sagittal plane, bisect the body into what's known as bilateral symmetry. We have a left side and we have a right side anatomically. That's anatomical left and anatomical right. And then, of course, we have the levels of hierarchy for organizing the human body. The simplest level is the atomic or chemical level that makes up our nucleic acids, our proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and other chemicals that are important for the synthesis of macromolecules that build cells, like phospholipids for the cell membrane, proteins for the receptors and enzymes, carbohydrates as glycogen to store energy, or glucose to use that energy, and of course the nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. The cellular level is increased in its level of complexity through the next level called tissues, and there are 4 basic tissues in the human body. You may be familiar with that from anatomy. There is muscle tissue, there is nervous tissue, there is epithelial tissue. Epithelial meaning the lining of organs, or the lining of the outside of the body like skin. And then, of course, there's the connective tissue. Connective tissue would be like blood and bones. When we combine all 4 of those tissue levels together, that gives us the organ level. And so organs are basically made up of muscle, nervous, epithelial, and connective tissues. The organ level is then increased in its level of complexity at the system level, where all of the organs in a particular system work together to do a particular function. In this case, we have a digestive system that uses the stomach and its associated organs for the breakdown and absorption of nutrients into the human body's circulatory system. And so there are somewhere around 11 systems or so in the human body. We're going to focus on the immune system, which is an interesting system because it's not really made up of interconnected organs that you would think of like in the respiratory, excretory, or digestive system. The immune system is really just a system of cells whose major job it is to go around determining self from non-self. And this is a major job for the immune system. The immune system's role is to keep you healthy and to prevent infection from pathogens. And anything that is considered non-self, we usually use a word to describe as an antigen, which is some sort of foreign protein that is identified as not belonging to your actual body. Self, of course, would be the tags that your body uses to identify its own cells in order to determine that you should not be attacked by the immune system. And so if we take a look at an example here, we have a situation where there's an immune response. On the left side, we see the skin is inflamed. And on the right side, we see that the tonsils are inflamed. And this is pretty typical for an immune response because we have a few things that are going on here. And so I'm going to lower my screen a little bit so I can write on it. And therefore, you guys get a better view of my handwriting and, unfortunately, a view of the ceiling. So on this side, we see a few, on the skin side, we see a few things here. If you notice, for example, we have an area where there is pus, there is redness, and there is swelling. And the same can be said about the other side. We have some pus going on here, which indicates that there's a bacterial infection when we see these whitish spots that are beginning to form here. And we have a lot of redness and swelling going on as well in this area of the tonsils. And so what we're actually looking at when we see pus forming in an area is an area of white blood cells that have died. And those white blood cells are called neutrophils. And neutrophils are white blood cells whose job it is to respond to an infection pretty rapidly. They're known as phagocytic cells. Their job is to do phagocytosis, but they only do phagocytosis once or twice. And once they eat an invading bacteria, they die. And they make the area kind of inhospitable to future bacteria from coming into that area and causing more problems. And so the pus that you see in this example is actually white blood cells that have died. The redness and swelling is caused by a set of proteins that are released by your immune system. And whenever you have an immune response, this swelling and redness are caused by either prostaglandins, which are a type of local hormone. It's a local signaling molecule that tells the infected area to open up blood vessels and increase the permeability to allow more white blood cells to get from your circulatory system to that area. It also raises the temperature of the area, allowing the area to become warm or hot to the touch. It's sort of like a local fever that you see that's going on there. And the swelling is also caused by vasodilation or opening of the blood vessels, caused by chemicals called histamines. And histamines are the same thing that cause problems if you have allergies, where the area gets really swollen, maybe in your nose or in your throat, and that swelling that occurs is these histamines. You try to relieve the symptoms of swelling in your nose or your throat when you have allergies or a cold by taking antihistamines. These chemicals, however, are good because what they do is they allow more fluids to rush to the area to allow healing to occur and to get more white blood cells to that area. Raising the temperature of the area helps to kill invading bacteria because the higher temperatures start to denature those bacteria's proteins and DNA, and that stops those bacteria from actually reproducing and making more of a problem. When we look at the immune system in general, you can actually see it doesn't look like it's connected and it doesn't have major organs that are present. However, on a closer examination, you can see that the largest organ of your immune system is your skin. Your skin is very important because it forms a physical barrier that prevents anything else from entering your body from the outside world. It is your first line of defense, and it's not a specific defense. It just stops everything. Same thing with your mucous membranes. It's not a very specific defense. It's not identifying what's coming into your body, but it is forming a barricade or a blockade so that nothing can pass through, or if it does, it gets trapped in the mucus that you then cough up or spit up or sneeze up or swallow. You have a few other parts of your immune system that help to transport a lot of the white blood cells around from different lymph nodes in your body, including your tonsils, and those are called lymph vessels. It's sort of like the other circulatory system in the body that helps to regulate and balance fluids for your body. If you've ever noticed a blister on your foot or your ankle, a blister is filled with this kind of clear fluid inside. That's called lymph fluid. That's the fluid that actually helps to regulate the amount of swelling that occurs in an area that might have an injury to it. And it does hook up to your circulatory system via a series of vessels in your neck, and so those two systems are very closely intertwined. Another lymph node that you have in your body other than your tonsils or the lymph nodes in your neck is your spleen. Your spleen is not part of the digestive system, even though it's in the abdomen next to the digestive system. Your spleen is just a really big lymph node. There are lymphatic vessels in your entire body, and they're all interconnected to each other. They're also connected to your bone marrow, which is where almost all of your blood cells that are white blood cells mature and actually start their life as stem cells. Some of those cells go on to the thymus, which is a gland that's kind of in the neck or chest region right above the heart, and that particular gland is where T cells mature. Bone marrow allows for B cells to mature, and so it's kind of convenient that we name the T cells for where they mature. That's not the correct thing I want to use. Let's try this. The T cells grow up here and the B cells mature there. But you can notice we don't see a logical system of tubes that are connected here. We don't see major organs that are connected like the digestive system. It's because the immune system is a cellular system. And so a few things to keep in mind when we're talking about the immune system. There are a few different lines of defense. The first line of defense is your non-specific defense. And this is sort of your innate defense. You're born with this. You have your skin and your mucous membranes and the little hairs in the back of the throat called the cilia, along with stomach acids and tears and a few other barriers that help you from birth stop infection. But it's not identifying what the infection is. It's just stopping infection. Your second line of defense is also non-specific. The second line of defense is where you begin to gobble up anything that might enter or break through the first line of defense. So if you have a cut or a scrape or an abrasion, then your phagocytic white blood cells will gobble up bacteria that got through your skin. Also, you produce antimicrobial proteins called interferons, which help your immune system not only identify where there are problems, but also shore up the healthy cells in your body so that they are protected against infected cells. Interferons prevent infection from spreading, and they're local signaling molecules that help cells identify what cells are healthy and what cells are not healthy. Finally, the inflammatory response right here, number 8, is sort of what we were talking about earlier when we said that histamines are extremely important in causing that swelling to dilate blood vessels and open up the permeability of capillaries so white blood cells can get to an area where there's a cut or an abrasion or a break in that first line of defense. Prostaglandins help to increase the blood flow to an area. They give that local fever. So if you've got a splinter and you can feel it throbbing in your skin and it's hot, it's warm to the touch, that's prostaglandins causing that warm feeling, and histamines causing that swelling and the tenderness that you feel where there's a splinter. If you leave the splinter in way too long, well, that can then cause an infection, and pus might begin to form in there because you've got white blood cells battling the bacteria that got in on the piece of wood of the splinter, and of course that's going to cause all sorts of problems in there. Blood clotting, of course, is important because prostaglandins help to signal cells to heal and to clot and to stop the wound from bleeding and to stop any more bacteria from getting in. Your last line of defense, I'm going to highlight in a different color here, the third line of defense. Very, very important because this is your specific or adaptive immunity. You need to learn what's dangerous for your body, what antigens don't belong inside of your cells or inside of your bloodstream. And your specific line of defense, your adaptive immunity, is something that has to learn over the course of your lifetime to identify what doesn't belong. Self versus non-self. Try to figure out what cells have foreign proteins on their surface. And so you have two ways to do that. You've got lymphocytes, which are your B cells and your T cells, the two very specific white blood cells that are involved in the immune system. And then you have antibodies, and antibodies are the actual proteins that are made by B cells. B cells' jobs include producing antibodies for every different kind of antigen that comes into your body through a break in your first line of defense. Antibodies, and I'm going to lower my screen again so I can write on it. Antibodies are specific Y-shaped proteins that are called immunoglobulins, or they're abbreviated IG. So if we say the word immunoglobulin, these are big globular proteins in the shape of a Y that attach to an antigen to stop it. Remember, antigens are bad. Antibodies, or immunoglobulins, are good. On page 2 of your packet, you have a family tree chart of the cells of the immune system. And the cells of the immune system pretty much all start in the bone marrow, where your stem cells are. These are undifferentiated. B cells don't have a job yet, and they earn their job based on quite a few things, quite a few factors. Genes that are switched on or off, environmental factors, for example, where do they mature, in the thymus or the bone marrow? And of course, what's actually infecting and what hormones tell your stem cells to become what kinds of white blood cells. And so there's two major branches, off to the left side and off to the right side. On the left side, we have our specific cells, specific immunity. And on the left side, we have our non-specific cells, our non-specific immunity. And so if we take a look at the specific side has a B cell, T cell, and then natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are cells that go around pretty much gobbling up and destroying infected cells or tumor cells that are in the body pretty non-discriminately. They'll come up to the cell and they'll kind of pop it with chemicals and enzymes that blow it up. There are some T cells that do that as well, but they're more involved in identifying using local signaling molecules, which we'll talk about in a moment. If you notice down here, we have our plasma cells. These plasma cells are the ones that make antibodies, or, as we said before, immunoglobulins, Ig. And you can see those antibodies are sitting on the surface of that plasma cell. Plasma cells have to learn what antibodies to make based on what is attacking you, what pathogens are involved. What happens here, where you can see this little split that's occurring, you make memory cells to actually remember what infection has begun in the body, what infection has invaded the body, what pathogens and antigens have started to infect your cells. And so memory cells help to shorten the time it takes to make new antibodies during a secondary infection. And so you have your primary infection over here. These are made between 7 to 10 days after the initial infection. And then your memory cells are for your secondary infection. In other words, if you get infected again by the same pathogen, the same antigens, and those usually take 3 to 4 days to form. Then you have your helper T cells and you have your cytotoxic T cells. Helper T cells are sort of like the generals of the immune system, and their job is to coordinate and control all of the other immune cells. And the cytotoxic T cells are cells that go around popping and exploding infected cells. They're very specific. They involve the use of CD receptors. CD receptors could be CD4 or CD8 receptors, chemical receptors, protein receptors on the surface of your white blood cells that try to determine self from non-self. On the non-specific immunity side, we have mostly phagocytes. We have our neutrophil cells, and I'm going to do this in a different color. Our neutrophil cells over here are the cells that are involved in making pus. They don't live very long. They usually eat one bacteria at a time, and then they die, but they help to stop the infection. Tens of thousands of them could be in an infected area. Eosinophils, we don't have to know too much about those, but we could know that they stop parasites from invading your body. Basophils are usually involved in allergies, so allergic reactions. The mast cells are very important. These are the cells that help to make histamines. They're kind of like warning cells. They help to allow the body to swell up an area, allow more fluid to get there and more white blood cells to get there in order to fight an infection. And then finally down here, our dendritic and macrophage cells are known as our phagocytes. These are our big eaters. And their job is to gobble up something that does not belong. In other words, they're going to eat a bacteria, or they're going to gobble up some kind of antigen, and then they have to make a decision. What do I do with this antigen? Do I just hold on to it, Do I digest it, or do I show it to another white blood cell? So what we're going to do in the second part of this video is we're going to examine what happens once a phagocyte attacks and digests and destroys an antigen that it finds in the body that doesn't belong.